of the month at noon Mountain, we will be here with a new presentation. During this presentation, you may come up with questions. If you do, please use the Q&A button on your screen to send in your questions, as all of you are muted on this presentation. Doug is the curator director of the American Numismatic Association's Edward C. Rochette Money Museum in Colorado Springs, Colorado. He is responsible for developing, planning, and content of the museum's exhibition program and the organization and care of the ANA collections. He has created dozens of numismatic exhibits for the museum and for the ANA's semi-annual conventions. His recent work has expanded the museum's exhibits into the virtual world. Doug will be presenting Introduction to Greek Coinage, Money, Civic, Pride, and Mass Communication. It's all yours, Doug.
Thanks very much, Paula. Welcome, everybody. I hope everybody's having a good day so far. I'm going to share my screen right now, and then we can start. Basically, we're going to be talking about an introduction to Greek coinage and basically how to identify it and what it looks like and some of the history behind it and why they created it in the first place. So first off, we'll start out with money, the basic definition of what money is. It may be hard to imagine a world without coinage, but for most of human existence, trade within communities and regions was handled without coins or paper money. Many types of objects have been used as money, from carved stones to the feathers of rare birds. The only requirements were that the objects be reasonably available and durable so they could represent value. So what is money? A simple definition is that money is anything that people will accept as payment in exchange for goods or services and has been used in one form or another ever since humans began to trade. The earliest forms of money were used to create a system to measure the value of items people wanted to exchange. Money can also be a means of storing or accumulating wealth. In some cultures, money has a purely ceremonial or prestige purpose in which the value of the object rests not in what it can buy, but whatever it represents. Now, the Greeks came up with a system that was based on the idea of long-distance trade. So trade has been vital to civilizations all over the world and across most of history. It has made an important contribution to national wealth and, in some cases, survival. Trade routes were the communication conduits of the ancient world. Inventions, ideas, artistic styles, languages, and customs, as well as goods and raw materials, were carried by merchants over vast distances along these trade routes. In the ancient world, long-distance trade played a much more important role in cultural, religious, and artistic exchanges than it does in our world now with the internet and satellites and all the other communications paraphernalia of modern technology. Ancient communication between the major centers of civilization in Europe and Asia depended on word of mouth and face-to-face encounters between people of different backgrounds. By the beginning of the 1st century AD, merchants, diplomats, and travelers could cross the ancient world from Britain to Spain in the west on to China and Japan in the east. This was a major change, and it changed the world around the 1st century BC to AD. This map gives you a little idea of that. So back to our talk about money. What does it take to make money work? A key precursor to the development of money is that you need to have a developed system of weights and measures. You have to be able to measure how much metal or how much wheat or wine or any other item that's being traded you have in order to determine a price for that. As trade moved beyond the face-to-face dealings of neighbors and acquaintances, it became important to create standards for comparison of goods. Thus, the systems of weight and measures came into being, but they were only useful if they were standardized. A central authority was needed to develop and monitor such systems. By 2000 BC, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China had all developed systems of weights and measures. After the development of a system of weights and measures, it was realized eventually that metals could provide a more manageable, durable, and flexible medium of exchange. And long-distance trade converted in many places from cattle, calories, and other materials to metals. The advantage of metals were its divisibility, its durability, and its intrinsic value, plus its relative compactness combined with the fact that it was easy to work with. Once you understood how to smelt metals, working with them became progressively easier as you got better controlling the heat of your ovens and learning more about the alloys. The use of precious metals as money began with the ancient civilizations of the Near East and China. As early as 2000 BC in both Mesopotamia and Egypt, there emerged a practice of carefully weighing pieces of gold and silver to determine their value and paying tribute to local rulers, placing offerings at sacred temples, and performing business transactions. At first, metal objects were used, including spits, cauldrons, and tripods, rough bronze ingots in Italy, for example, or copper, silver, and gold rings in Egypt. These evolved into irregular lumps of silver, gold, electrum, copper, and bronze that were valued by weight. A hierarchy of value was developed for these metals as trade increased. Money in the form of small metal discs or metal ingots marked with information guaranteeing their value was independently invented in Asia Minor, India, and China during the first millennium BC. These objects are the first coins, i.e., they have a regular weight for each denomination, are marked for identification, and circulate at a fixed rate without the need for weighing. The coins from these three areas became the major monetary traditions, Greek, Indian, and Chinese, which still influence our modern ideas of how money should look and how it should be used. We'll go into talking about how the coins are made and how to recognize them. Greek coins were made by impressing a design carved on the face of a metal bar initially, and then two metal bars known as dies onto a piece of metal, the planchet, that would become a coin. The planchet was placed between the two dies, one, the anvil die, mounted into an anvil, and the other, the punch die, held by hand and hammered into the planchet. The result was a coin with an impression on two sides. This is the same method used for modern coin minting. The only thing that's changed is how the dies are struck onto the planchet. So now we use mechanized methods, electricity and hydraulics to do what was done by hand. Greek die engravers derived their art from the still more ancient skills of the jewelers and signet makers of the Middle East. What is truly amazing is the ancient engravers' ability to create dies in actual scale without modern reduction or magnification tools and in reverse, since these had to be done in a mirror image in order to make the positive that was used on the coins. This is this ability without modern ability to magnify and work in different media to make their larger copies was amazing when you consider the minute detail of many of these ancient coins. This also explains the fame earned by Greek master engravers of Sicily, for example, during the 5th and 4th centuries BC, when some of the all-time greatest works of numismatic art were created. A basic minting operation would consist of a cellator, a die engraver, a malleator, the person who hammered the dies, a suppositor, the person who placed the planchet and who might also hold the upper die, and a moneyer, who was responsible for quality control and accounting. The Greeks were the first to use money in a way that we would recognize today. Now, a key to understanding Greek coins is to understand something about the Greek alphabet and how it was used. The Greek alphabet developed from the Phoenician alphabet. There were regional variations, but by the 4th century BC, a standardized format was used throughout the Greek-speaking world. Early Greek coins, around the 6th century BC, sometimes featured retrograde inscriptions, i.e., instead of being written from right to left, they were written from left to right. No, from left to right, they were written from right to left, indicating that the standard writing conventions that we are accustomed to today had not yet been developed. So here's a couple of examples of how that can work. Greek weight systems are important to understand when you're studying Greek coins, because there were a number of different weight systems. As you can see from the chart, there were a lot of different weight systems possible, and they were confusing to say the least if you were involved in international trade. With that said, certain weight standards were commonly used for long distance trade at different times and places. The Corinthian standard, for example, was used predominantly in the West, where Corinthian colonies were common. The Attic standard i.e. the standard from Athens, was the closest to becoming internationally accepted. In most ports and cities, Athenian coinage was recognized and accepted with little difficulty, in part because of the Athenians' great advantage of having the Laurion mines, where they actually could produce silver very near to the city itself. In ancient Greece, money began as cattle, then changed to metal rings, rods, or spits. Metal ingots were stamped with symbols to certify its weight and metal purity and came in sheets or slabs. One well-known example from the British Museum is in the form of an ox hide, a 25.5 kilogram copper ingot equivalent to 8.5 grams of gold. It was equal to the value of a whole ox. The ox hide ingot is made from copper and was found in Cyprus and dates to 1225 to 1150 BC. So this is pre-Greek, but part of the Mycenaean Minoan civilization. The term drachma is taken from the Greek verb to grasp. They're referring to the sticks of metal used as currency. These sticks of metal, called oboloi, came into use around 1100 BC, and the names of obol and drachm were transferred to Greek coinage. Greek numbers were written using the letters of the alphabet, and this chart gives you an idea of how that was done. So essentially, you would use the single digit, double digit, and triple digit to make numbers like 251, which would be written as sigma nu alpha or alpha nu sigma, giving 200 plus 50 plus 1. This becomes important when you get to the different Greek dating eras. Prior to the West's adoption of the Christian era for dating, many other base dates had been used. The Romans used Rome's mythical foundation date of 753 BC for their calendar, while many Greeks used the traditional date of the first Olympic Games, 776 BC, for their first year of the Olympic era. Many Hellenistic kingdoms, on the other hand, used a regnal year system based on the reign of each king, thus years 1 through 20 or however many years the king ruled for King A. Problem with this system is it's less useful to modern historians because you don't know for sure when King A came to power or even when they died sometimes. Other kingdoms, such as the Seleucid kingdoms and the other successor kingdoms to Alexander the Great's empire, use the foundation date of their kingdom. In the case of the Seleucids, 312 BC. So you could find coins that have those dates on them. The problem is you have to know something about the coins to start with, where their origin is, and sometimes their politics to determine which date system they might be using. Now, Greek denominations. Throughout the Greek world, similar names were adopted for coinage. However, the smart trader knew not to trust the name, but to weigh the coins. Though they may have the same name from Athens to Cyprus, they varied greatly in terms of weight and metal purity, and the value of a coin depended on how much precious metal it contained. Early coins were made of precious metals, gold, electrum, or silver. The stater was the base unit for gold coinage, but the Greeks also called some larger denominations silver coins by this name as well, since it was originally a term for a standard unit of weight. This could be confusing to outsiders. These were used along with electrum, an alloy of silver and gold found naturally in Asia Minor, where the Greek cities of Asia Minor naturally issued electrum coins as part of their tradition. By far, the most common metal used by the Greeks was silver, with a drachm as its base denomination, much like our dollar today, for example. Traders and merchants were careful to keep track of the coin types since the dram varied greatly from one state to the next, weighing 3.6 grams under the Phoenician standard and up to 6.25 grams under the Aeginetan standard. The Athenians had a more complete system of denominations than most because of their wealth and the importance of their coins in international trade. So they had further divisions than most cities did of their silver coinage. Bronze was first introduced in Greek coinage during the 5th century BC in Sicily as a substitute for inconveniently tiny silver denominations. Some of these tiny denominations, like the hemitartamorion, only weighed 0.09 grams. So it's a teeny little piece, and yet it had enough value to be able to buy a loaf of bread. So it could be a real problem to lose them. And you get Greek plays that talk about how people kept their coins. Sometimes they kept them in their mouths, which could be a bit embarrassing, I bet, if you swallowed your day's wages in the form of tiny little silver pieces. So bronze became the solution, where a bronze equivalent to the dram would be something like 5 or 6 times the size of the equivalent coin and quite a bit heavier. Unfortunately, the relationship between the bronze and silver coinage is often not well known. And in some cases, we're not even sure of the name for the many bronze coins, except in the case of Sicily, where coins are marked with their denomination, making it much simpler for us to make comparisons. Now we'll go to the earliest Greek coins. Now, the earliest of them began as lumps of electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of silver and gold, valued by weight. These were produced in the kingdom of Lydia, or the area that is now Anatolia, the center of the Turkish state. Merchants began to mark these lumps of metal, thus inventing the first coins. Soon afterwards, governments took over the issue of coinage and have continued to produce the vast majority of coins ever since. This slide shows some of the earliest examples of coins known, all from Lydia or Ionia, and not identified with a particular city or kingdom, with the exception of the last two, which are associated with the kingdom of Lydia. So now the most information we have on the earliest coins, the earliest information was recovered at the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus in modern Turkey, and it has provided evidence for the earliest coins known from the ancient world. The temple was rebuilt several times during its more than 1,000 years of use, with the first temple dating to the 8th century BC. Precious objects were dedicated to the goddess by burying them in this site. The objects included bronze belts and ornaments, bear's teeth, amber from the Baltic, gold and ivory statuettes, and tiny electrum coins. The most important group of coins was found in a small undecorated pot datable to approximately 650 to 625 BC. And in that, you had examples of the first two coins starting from the upper left, the electrum eighth stater with just a punch and no other marks, and the electrum hecti, which was marked with striations and a double punch. So those come out of that earliest find. Now, these pieces here show you the dumps on the left, and they were produced in different denominations because we know they had standard weights, and you can group them that way, but they had no markings other than the reverse punch. Striated pieces such as this one are thought to be the next step towards actual coins. The striations may have served as an identifier for the issuer so they could recognize the pieces that they produced. Recent research has confirmed that the metallic composition, specifically of these electrum pieces, that metallic composition of gold to silver was a exact ratio. These were not electrum pieces that were recovered from nature and then used just as they were. They were actually smelted, and the ratio was determined pretty exactly. They were quite good at getting these mixes of metal down to fairly precise amounts. And these earliest electrum coins were controlled and not random as once thought. This is among the early of the next coin is one of the earliest to feature an inscription. This is the electrum stater of Ephesus, and it has the name of Phanes on it, and you can read it in retrograde on the coin. Phanes me, basically, Phanes made me. We don't know who Phanes was. There's no record of a king of that name, but he may have been a wealthy merchant, is the speculation most often used today. And then the lower right has two coins of the Kingdom of Lydia. These are the first of the Greek, well, they're called Greek coins because they become part of the Greek tradition, but these are the first of the non-electrum coins, gold and silver, and they were attributed to the time of Croesus, King Croesus of Lydian fame. The last thing we'll talk about before we actually go into the coins in detail were the eras of Greek numismatic art. Early Greek coinage is characterized by its high relief and exceptional engraving. Throughout the various city-states, there was a great deal of importance placed on the artistic quality of the coins, and this is perhaps one of the major reasons why coins were adopted so eagerly and quickly by the Greek city-states, because the city-state was a brand new idea at the time. They'd only been around for 100 years or so, where the Greeks had moved away from the idea of kings and began organizing themselves based on their urban environment by their city. And they were very proud of this new political organization and began to find ways to uh, show their pride. And coins came around at just the right moment as a propaganda tool where you could advertise uh, as well as doing your trade and business. You could advertise the existence of your city and its connections. Um, so uh, when the first coins were issued, the familial coats of arms were the first patterns printed on the coins. Later, when the rulers of the city-states had taken control of minting, the arms of monarchs became the symbol of the city-state itself. Very often, a coat of arms was determined by which deity was a patron to the city. So as the cities became oligarchies and civic pride became more important, they began issuing coins that identified the city itself. So in Athens, you see the head of Athena, the patron goddess of Athens, and on the reverse, by about the very start of the 5th century BC, you see coins featuring the Athena, and the owl, who was Athena's avatar. Athena was a goddess of wisdom and the military arts. And even today, her avatar, the owl, is associated with wisdom. It's a carryover from the ancient world. So classical, with the three types of eras of numismatic art, you have classical coins, preceded by archaic coins, and then followed by Hellenistic coins. Archaic coins are commonly one-sided, so they have image on the obverse and with punch on the reverse, with anapagraphic, i.e., designs without wording, without words, based on God's mythology or punning allusions related to the issuing city or tribe. Classical coins almost always have designs on both sides and generally include an inscription. Skilled artists were often hired and sometimes allowed to sign their work. Images continue to reflect the city or nation of origin, and places like Magna Graecia became the home of the greatest numismatic artists of all time. Hellenistic coins are characterized by the slow decline in overall artistic quality, with the exception of the royal portrait coins, which became common in the wake of Alexander and the development of the successor states. And standardization of designs and themes became common, as well as an expansion of standard imagery that represented royalty or certain aspects of uh, different gods or elements, concepts. One explanation for the rapid spread of the coins among Greeks is this development of the polis and the civic identity. The city gods and goddesses, sometimes a symbol that also a symbol that made the coin identifiable as from that specific polis became important and really remained important for as long as the city-states remained independent. And here's some examples. So here we have the Athenian coin at the left, which we've already talked about, with Athena as the main element of the obverse, and on the reverse, which still resembles very highly a punch, which it came from, because this is where the punch die was used to strike the coin. And you can see the edges of it through the square around the owl. And here they've added alpha, theta, epsilon for the first three letters of Athens to make sure that people knew where this coin came from. This is one of the things that the Athenians introduced very early on, because their coins became a major trade coinage used across the Eastern Mediterranean, and then eventually across much of the ancient world, as they their coins were known for their regularity, purity, and quality. Then we have one of the city-states where they used a punning illusion. So Phocaea, they show a sea, a port seal, a harbor seal, and it's the name of the seal was Phocae, and it's a play on the name of the city, Phocaea. These are early coins that use that identification to associate the coin with its original city. Metapontion, which is the fourth piece there, famous for its production of wheat. It was very early on became famous because it had access to large amounts of wheat that were used in trade. And so why not use that on their coinage? Now, the third coin, the middle coin, is Philip the second of Macedon, and it features a portrait of Philip himself and an image of his horse, which won the Olympic Games. This is important because Philip was a Macedonian. The kingdom of Macedon was a Greek-speaking kingdom, but they were considered to be more or less country yokels by the city-states of the rest of Greece. And it was very important for Macedonians to be seen as at least equal to the Greeks, as part of the Greek civilization. And in order to be able to compete at the Olympic Games, you had to be accepted as a Greek in order to be able to compete. So the fact that Philip's horse was allowed to enter the games and that it won was an important milestone in Macedonian pride of being part of the major civilization of their time. An understanding of Greek mythology and religion is key to making sense of all these coins. The choice of the badges to represent particular cities was often based on religious or mythological ties between the city and the god or goddess, or a mythological character or event. So knowing something about mythology and how it connects to the different cities, such as Corinth, Athens, Ephesus, and other places, makes a big difference in trying to identify the coins. Greek gods and mythological figures are often closely identified with these localities, and this can help in identifying. In other cases, civic badges have nothing to do with mythology, but are a pun on the city name, as we saw with Phocaea. And we find these at different cities across the world. They're not quite as common as the association with gods or mythological events, but they can be important. Now, here's the world of the ancient Greeks. Greek culture, Greek civilization was not limited to what we call Greece today. The civilization originated in Greece, in southern, central Greece, but by the 8th century BC, the Greeks were colonizing most of the coasts of the Mediterranean. They began the colonization process in the 9th century, and then right up through the 4th century, they were colonizing areas as far distance as the Black Sea, at Olbia and Panticapaeum, and then going all the way to the west as far as the southeastern shores of Spain. This is where they came up with a block because the Carthaginians, whose ancestors came from Lebanon or Phoenicia, became a major rival and blocked further expansion. For example, in Sicily, where 2/3 of Sicily was colonized by the Greeks, while the western third was dominated by the Carthaginians. So this gives you an idea of what the Greek world at the time consisted of. And this is essentially where coinage spread first. And for the first 2 centuries of coin use, was pretty much limited to the Greek cities across this region. By the end of the 6th century BC, coinage was being produced and used wherever Greek cities existed, from the Western Mediterranean to the eastern shore of the Black Sea. And again, this phenomenon is a development of the Greek city-state. This was the time when most Greek states made the transition from traditional monarchy to the rule of self-made tyrants. Coins were an ideal propaganda tool and an easy way to transfer wealth to the foreign mercenaries who were necessary to maintain the power of tyrants. Once merchants realized the convenience of the new coins, long-distance trade seems to have played a significant role in the transition from precious metals serving as weighed bullion versus being converted into coinage. Aegina is the first of the cities that we'll talk about, and here you get an idea of what Aeginetan coins looked like. It was the first city-state in Europe to adopt coinage sometime during the early 6th century BC. Aegina's coins were known as turtles from their characteristic feature, and they were known as turtles in the ancient world. This is not a modern nickname. Their earliest coins feature a sea turtle, which was later replaced by a tortoise. Aegina, according to Herodotus, was a colony of Epidaurus, to which state it was originally subject. Its placement between Attica and the Peloponnesus made it a site of trade even earlier, and its earliest inhabitants allegedly came from Asia Minor. Minoan ceramics have been found in contexts of circa 2000 BC. The discovery on the island of a number of gold ornaments belonging to the last period of Mycenaean art suggests that Mycenaean culture existed in Aegina for some generations after the Dorian conquest of the surrounding land masses in Argos and Sparta. It is probable the island was not Doricized before the 9th century BC, but they became early issuers of coinage within 30 or 40 years of the invention of coinage in Lydia. Now, the fact that the Aeginetan standard of weights and measures developed during the mid-7th century was one of the 2 standards in general use in the Greek world is sufficient evidence of the early commercial importance of the island. Now, one of the things that's interesting is they originally had a sea turtle on their obverse, and they eventually switched over to the land turtle, perhaps in response to their navy being eclipsed by the nearby Athenians. But we're not sure exactly what was happening at the time. One fact that we must note when looking at these earliest ancient coins, these objects represented a large store of wealth. These were not used in small daily transactions. A tetradrachm or a stater was a lot of money, and were basically used for large trade deals between merchants and by rulers to pay for their armies. Even the tiny silver diobol, about half the size of a dime, was equivalent to a day's work for a skilled labor in the 5th century Athens, 5th century BC Athens. So these are relatively large amounts of money. Athens was one of the first city-states to begin minting coinage as well. they had the good fortune to have the silver mines of Mount Lorion close at hand and struck their first coins with emblems of trade, such as an amphora. By the end of the 6th century BC, Athens had introduced the design which was to become their trademark for the next 300 years. The obverse featured the head of Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and the reverse, an owl, an aspect of Athena, which is why we associate the owl with wisdom even today, as I've said. These coins, nicknamed owls, became a recognized and reliable standard for trade throughout the ancient world and were heavily imitated in many areas. Now, the wealth of the Lorian mines enabled Athens to become the commercial and cultural hub of Greece for centuries. Pericles, an important Athenian leader, made Athens the wealthiest Greek city-state by moving the treasury of the Delian League, which was the center of the Athenian Empire, devoted to fighting the Persians, to the Athenian Acropolis. The Delian League was a consortium, and the fact that they did this created many enemies among the Athenians, as they were supposed to be the first among equals, but they took the leading role by saying that they were taking the greatest risks and spending the most money in producing their fleet and protecting the rest of their neighbors. And eventually turned out to hurt them, but their coinage was the most commonly found throughout the Eastern Mediterranean and beyond for several centuries because of their wealth in silver. Now, Corinth was another major trade city. It had become a major emporium before Athens did. They were important in trade towards the west, the central Mediterranean and points west, as early as the mid 6th century BC. And when they introduced coins, their coin designs were naturally adopted by their colonies, which they founded across southern Italy and into Sicily, including places such as Syracuse. According to mythology, the city was founded by Corinthos, a descendant of the god Helios, the sun god, while other myths suggested that it was founded by the goddess Ephyra, the daughter of the titan Oceanus, thus the ancient name of the city, which was Ephyra. In 570 BC, the inhabitants started to use silver coins called colts or foals, and this is part of their foundation myth as well. In classical times, Corinth rivaled Athens and Thebes in wealth, and this was all based on the Isthmian traffic and trade. They were at a critical spot between the Peloponnesus, the peninsula, and the mainland of Greece, where the spit of land was narrow enough to actually transship goods from the Adriatic to the Aegean seas. Corinth was a major exporter of black figure pottery to the city-states around the Greek world, and the symbolism of the Pegasus is related to Pegasus having landed on the Acrocorinth, the rock at the center of the Corinthian city where their temples were located, and left a footprint upon the Acrocorinth. And this was part of the foundation myth of the city. Athena was also their patron goddess, and so Athena appears as it does on the Athenian coins on Corinthian coins. Thebes. Now, Thebes was the largest city of the ancient region of Boeotia and was the leader of the Boeotian Confederacy. It was a major rival of ancient Athens and sided with the Persians during the 480 BC invasion under Xerxes with the Persians because of their rivalry. Theban forces ended the power of Sparta at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC under the command of Epaminondas. The Sacred Band of Thebes, an elite military unit, famously fell to the last man at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC against Philip II and Alexander the Great. prior to the destruction of the city by Alexander in 335 BC, Thebes was a major force in Greek history and was the most dominant city-state at the time of the Macedonian conquest of Greece. So Thebes produced plentiful coinage as the center of the Boeotian region, and you can see they focused on the design of a shield. At first, it's a shield based on the old Mycenaean types of shields, which were mentioned in Homer's Iliad, the shield that was formed with ox hides over a frame of wood, and they had the holes at the side for the spears to be pushed through. That became a characteristic shield used by the Boeotians for centuries. And here are various designs used at different times in that area. You can see there's a development from a mill sail punch, as the coin at the upper left has on the reverse, to designs that included figures such as the seated goddess looking at the helmet. That's presumably Athena. And then you had items related to trade, the amphora on the later coinage with the letters theta and epsilon standing for Thebes. And then the last of the coins here has the first letters of Boeotia. Now we move on to some of the colonies of Greece. And in Asia Minor, where the earliest of the Greek colonies existed, you had a variety of different types of coins, some issued in cities that were not ethnically Greek, such as this first coin from Lycia, where the dynastic, I cannot pronounce that, Vexere, around 450 to 430 BC, issued coins with the triskelies on the reverse, which is a symbol used by Lycian cities within the region, and features an image of Athena. Then you have Ephesus, which was famous for its temple of Artemis. Artemis was associated with hunting, and with the deer was her symbol, but they also used the bee, which became a standard symbol for Ephesus throughout the classical period. Teos had the Sphinx, and here you see an example, an altered version of the Sphinx, but the lion with an eagle head in this case. And then Miletus, a silver stater issued by Deminos from 350 to 340 BC. Now, Magna Graecia, which consisted of southern Italy primarily, but is often, Sicily is often included as well. Magna Graecia means Greater Greece, and the reason it was called Magna Graecia because of the number of colonies that were founded there and their relative wealth, and eventually their large populations after several hundred years. The wealth was based on the fact that Sicily and southern Italy were incomparably wealthier in farmland and better farmland than mainland Greece. And so they became famous for their wheat production, and even more importantly, their horses. Greece was unsuitable to producing lots of horses, except in the northern sections where Thessaly was, whereas Sicily in particular was very well suited to horse breeding. There was open land available, and they soon became very famous for their horses, and this became a major part of their coinage as time went on, and we'll see that in the next slides when we get to Sicily. So one of the interesting coin types that come out of Magna Graecia, basically southern Italy in this case, a number of basically 6 cities uh, started issuing a unique coin type. These are the Incuse coins of this area, and they were only issued for a period of about a maximum of 80 years, in most cases 30 to 50 years at the most. And we're not sure why these cities issued them, but they are very specialized in that these are done with 2 dies. They're not done like you would see with later medieval coins, where you'd have 1 die pressing on a thin piece of metal and uh, being struck on a leather piece so that the metal would actually fill the die and leave an impression on the reverse. In this case, they used 2 separate dies, which was technically very difficult to do. We believe the dies were hinged so that they could keep the relationship of the dies to each other's, um, because otherwise they couldn't actually strike the incuse or recessed portion in the right place, and it would make a mess of the coins. So these coins actually have 2 dies that fit more or less into each other. So when they strike the coins, the raised portions correspond to the incuse portions on the other side. Uh, so no one's really sure what the inspiration for these coins were. They were technically much harder to make, but one possible source was that Pythagoras, who came from Phocaea, the city we mentioned with the harbor seal, he arrived in Magna Graecia during the middle of the decades of the 6th century BC. Pythagoras was a famous mathematician, of course. We've all heard of the Pythagorean theorem. And he was also an inventor and philosopher. He actually became the center for his own religion, in fact. And he was aside from this, he was the father of geometry. And he created his own cult and wielded religious and secular political power in many cities of the region. He was fascinated with discovering the mathematical root for all things and may have had a hand in inventing the technique used to produce the Incuse coins. There are some legends that allude to this possibility, and it is interesting, though we have no real proof to offer, that he did help with the invention or distribution of these, but these coins were produced at the cities that were the center of his cult. But they provide an interesting and beautiful subset of ancient Greek coins. Then we go to other cities, including cities from the boot of Italy, so Tarentum or Taras. We also have Metapontion and Messenion, which is at the closest point between Sicily and Italy. And then one of the famous early masterpieces of numismatic art, the Dram of Naxos from 461 to 430 BC. We don't know the name of this artist, but he's identified by his works on the tetradrachm and drams, and also a couple of works in a couple of other cities in Sicily. Now, Sicily and southern Italy were colonized by the Greeks beginning in the late 9th century BC. They began a mass migration from the cities of the mainland Greece and Asia Minor that completely changed the ethnic makeup of eastern Sicily and southern Italy, so much so that they became known as Magna Graecia, as we said earlier, and their population exceeded that of Greece itself eventually. The cities of the region became famous for their wealth and easy lifestyle. This wealth was based on rich agricultural lands available, which were more productive and larger in area than those of Greece. Cities such as Syracuse, Acragas, Neapolis, Sybaris, and Taranto, or Taras, became wealthy and powerful centers of Greek culture. Eventually, all will be conquered either by Carthage or by Rome, with Syracuse the last to fall in the Second Punic War, when they were conquered by Rome after deciding to join the Carthaginians at the last moment. By the middle of the 6th century BC, Greeks of Magna Graecia and Sicily began to introduce their own coinage, and they introduced a unique style of all their own, while the cities of Sicily soon began to produce coins of outstanding artistic quality that would become the standard for numismatic art for centuries. And here's where you start to see chariots on the coinage of Sicily. And these chariots are associated with victory, typically placing a wreath on the horses or on the driver of the chariots. And these chariots are in a way similar to that of the coinage of Philip of Macedon. They refer to victories at the Olympic Games. And Sicily began to dominate the horse racing events at the Olympic Games for many decades, including one of the early events that only existed for about 60 years, which was the mule racing chariots. The tetradrachm of Gela actually shows what appears to be a mule chariot. So these chariots became a standard feature on many of the colonies of Sicily. And you can see the beauty and detail of these coins. At the height of Greek numismatic art is this decadrachm of Syracuse on the right. This one signed by the famous artist Ioanitos. His great rival was Kimon. They both were productive at roughly the same time, with Kimon being slightly older than Ioanitos, and they competed with each other in producing coins with the same basic design, the 4-horse chariot, along with the nymph of Syracuse, shown as if she is underwater, which is why the hair is gently waving and why you have the dolphins around. They competed in advancing the art of the time, so that the chariot horses are all shown separately galloping. The wheels of the chariot are shown foreshortened to give the idea of motion. All of these elements contributed to this advancement of numismatic art that has rarely been exceeded since then. And you can see the general standard of art has gotten very high, even on the gold 30 litra, where Zeus is looking very realistic. The hair is very detailed. The Pegasus, in reference to Syracuse's origins as a colony of Corinth, is quite well done as well. And here you also see this, the first two coins at the top are both from Syracuse. You see a late archaic style versus the mature classical style on the right, with the earlier piece, the tetradrachm, on the left being the remnants of the archaic style. Now we move on to later Greek coins, basically what are known as Hellenistic coins. The divide is essentially the conquest of Alexander the Great. Alexander III of Macedon became the king of Macedonia in 336 BC at the age of 20, inheriting from his father a rich kingdom, a powerful dream, and an excellent army. The dream he inherited was to conquer the Persian Empire, the largest and most powerful empire known up to that time. And this was in revenge for the Persians' invasions of Greece. So the Macedonians would take on the idea of being the leaders of Greece in their great conquest of the Persian Empire. in order to punish them for having attacked Greece during the 5th century. So Alexander's empire eventually stretched from modern Greece all the way into Pakistan, including Egypt to the south and Uzbekistan in the north. He was only forced to stop when his army refused to go any further. Alexander the Man was a military and organizational genius, considered a god by some and a monstrous tyrant by others. He was educated by Aristotle, extremely brave. He was wounded over 30 times during his campaigns. In fact, one of the wounds he experienced in his conquest of Afghanistan, something that nobody has since completely accomplished to the extent that he did, was a wound that he got while he was when he became the first to cross the walls of a minor hill city in Afghanistan. The wound was in his lung, and it's thought contributed to his death years later. At his death in 323 BC in Babylon, at the age of 32, Alexander left a world permanently changed, a world in which the Greek language and culture would form the intellectual foundation for the next 300 years and beyond for all of the region we know of as Greece and Egypt and the Middle East, right up to the areas of Afghanistan into the borders of India. The legend of Alexander still lives in folk tales told from England to India in dozens of languages. One of his major accomplishments was in the field of numismatics. As Alexander conquered his empire, he organized it. One of the great things he was able to do was create a administrative structure in the wake of the conquest that was designed to change the empire into a single organic unit. Now, creating in the process was the first great world coinage. This coinage was produced from the enormous hoarded wealth of the Persian Empire. For example, the treasury of Persepolis, one of the capitals of the Persian Empire alone, had over 3,000 tons of gold and silver, an enormous amount of hoarded wealth that Alexander coined into money in order to fund his continuing conquests and also to revolutionize the economics of the ancient world. Alexander's coinage was the most extensive and uniform of the ancient world before the establishment of the Roman Empire. His coins consisted of gold staters and double staters. Gold up to this time had been relatively very rare in the Greek city-state systems. There just wasn't a lot of gold around, and there wasn't much need for it. The value was so high. Most of the city-states didn't have the trade that could support it, and they didn't have the large armies that needed that kind of wealth to pay for them. And then they issued the more common silver tetradrachms, drams, and token bronze coins. These coins were unique for the time in that they were produced with the same designs at dozens of mints, not just one central mint located throughout the empire. The designs of Alexander's tetradrachms and drams reflect his mythical ancestry. The obverse features the head of Hercules with the skin of the Nemean lion. Killing that lion was one of the famed labors of Hercules, Alexander's claimed ancestor. And since Hercules was the son of Zeus, chief of the Greek gods, Alexander placed Zeus enthroned on the reverse of his coins, holding an eagle, the avatar of Zeus. Thus, Alexander celebrates his relationship to divinity and his right to rule. And you can see these coins are produced at different mints across his empire, starting with Macedon, and then the Pergamon mint in Asia Minor, the Babylon mint in Mesopotamia, and again, the Babylon mint with a bronze coin. So his coinage was designed to monetize the society completely, which was something new for the eastern parts of his empire. And the coinage was plentiful enough to actually begin and solidify this process. So the Hellenistic world, the world left by Alexander, basically consisted of the Seleucid kingdom, the Antigonid kingdom, which was based in Asia Minor. Seleucid kingdom was based in Syria and points east all the way to the borders of India. And then the Ptolemaic kingdom, Ptolemy the first was astute enough to realize that in the wake of Alexander's death, uh, he wanted to find a place that would be secure, that he could control completely. And Egypt was the ideal because it was an isolated kingdom in the sense that the wealth of Egypt was all based on the Nile, and it was bordered on the east by deserts, which were easily defendable because they all concentrated at the edges of the Sinai desert right near the delta. So he managed to form a dynasty, which would be the longest lasting of the dynasties of the successors, right up to the time of Cleopatra the VII, when Rome took over in the late first century BC. The other kingdoms were the major players in the political game of the region, including Macedon and Seleucia and the Antigonid kingdom. There were other minor players and independent city states as well, but these were the superpowers of the time and affected the coinage and history of the region. Now, one of the characteristics of the coins were the use of realistic portraiture by the rulers, and this was the final numismatic element introduced by the Greeks before the advent of the Romans. These portraits formed the foundation from which Roman imperial coinage would develop from the first century BC until the end of the Western Roman Empire. Now, these realistic portraits were created using the highest, the finest talents of the engravers to create portraits of the kings as they were, in some cases with some flattery involved, but they were essentially designed to make sure that the people knew who their rulers were and could recognize them. And the messages on the coins were essentially about the great victories and the generosity and the good things about their rulers as messages to their people. The Seleucid kingdom was the largest, and it was formed by Seleucus I. He was one of the Alexander's companions and was commander of his elite guard regiment, the Silver Shields. He was unable to firmly establish his kingdom until 312 BC, at which point he declared himself king and became the ruler of Babylon after fighting and negotiating his way to the top level of Alexander's successors with Ptolemy I's help. The Seleucid Empire eventually stretched from the Aegean to the Indus, enveloping the easternmost portions of Alexander's former empire. Antioch in Asia Minor was selected as the capital of the Seleucid Empire and became home to one of the greatest mints of the Hellenistic period. The Seleucid dynasty was characterized by frequent conflicts within the family for control of the kingdom. No one was safe from their relatives, and as a result, infanticide was common, and the royal line was often at risk because of that. And so you can see the early kings, sorry about that, Seleucus I with his elephant chariot. Elephant chariots were used because the Seleucids had access to Indian elephants and they used them in their armies. So it was a famous element that was part of their army. And you can see the realistic portraits, such as the portrait of Antiochus III. This looks like a real person and does resemble what we know of Antiochus. Ptolemy the founded the Ptolemaic kingdom, and you can see the varieties there. The Ptolemaic kingdom became famous because of their adoption of certain Egyptian practices, including the idea that the royal line must remain pure, to the extent that the Ptolemies actually tolerated the marriage, encouraged the marriage of brother and sister and other very close relatives in order to preserve the royal line, the bloodline. This is something that the Egyptians had used before. It was part of their strategy in ruling Egypt to follow some of their practices. The Macedonian kingdom after Alexander also continued to use coins with various Macedonian types of elements. You had Athena Promachus, which is on the top left coin, which is Athena with the aegis and the shield, wielding a spear. You had the coins that featured some of the things that Macedon became famous for a while, which is their sea power. So you have Apollo seated on the prow of a ship issued by Antigonus. And the last of the more powerful kings, Perseus, who fought the Romans and lost, and Rome divided the Macedonian kingdom into 4 provinces after that to ensure that they would no longer have the power to revolt. One of the interesting stories is the conquest of Alexander left Greek and Macedonian settlers and cities scattered throughout the Middle East and Western Asia. After Alexander's death, invasions and revolts resulted in the fragmentation of the eastern portion of the empire. One of the most powerful and least known of these splinter kingdoms was Bactria, which became independent from the Seleucid Empire during the mid-3rd century BC. Bactria was located in what is now Afghanistan and became a powerful focus of Hellenism in the region for over 3 centuries. During the 2nd century BC, the Bactrians were isolated from the rest of the Greek world by the Parthian Empire. By the middle of the 1st century BC, they lost control of their original areas in Afghanistan, but managed to hold out in what is now Pakistan, which they reached via the Hindu Kush. Greek kingdoms were to survive until the middle of the 1st century AD in the Indus Valley region, which creates all sorts of interesting historical connections. The early Buddhist and early Hindu architecture was influenced by Greek architecture, but sculpture in particular was influenced. And the Bactrian, at least one Bactrian king became famous in Buddhist history for converting to Buddhism. And you can imagine him talking about Plato and the Greek gods and goddesses with the early Buddhist priests and deciding to convert. So Menander is represented in these coins in the lower left of the slide. He was the one who actually converted. One of the interesting elements of the Bactrian coinage is they are among the very first to use bilingual inscriptions. And so you had the Greek on the Menander coin, for example, it's the Savior King Menander, and it's repeated in Kharoshthi in an Indian dialect on the reverse, the same message, but in Kharoshthi. And then we get to how coinage spread slowly among the non-Greeks. So the Persians adopted coinage relatively early because they conquered the kingdom of Lydia. They did not use coinage throughout their empire, but they did use it in the areas that were already familiar with coinage, i.e. Anatolia, where the Lydian kingdom was, and along the borders of that area. And they introduced 2 basic coin types, the gold derrick, featuring the king either using a spear or a bow, and in this case on this derrick, and the silver siglos, which were widely used in trade within that western portion of the Persian Empire. You have the Greeks often mentioning them. These coins were used in payments to Greek mercenaries and for trade as well. And then we have Carthage. The Carthaginians developed coinage due to their contact with the Greeks, and primarily in the 5th century, they adopted these coins. Well, they began to use Greek coins to pay for the mercenaries. Mercenaries had gotten used to the idea of getting paid in coinage because it was something that was portable and they could take home with them relatively easily, as opposed to uh, other forms of payment, which were much less transportable, especially in emergencies. Say you lose a battle. Uh, by the 4th century, the Carthaginians began producing their own coins that were based on Greek concepts, but with distinctly Carthaginian subjects. In particular, you would see the horse, and you would see the palm tree and the lion, and images of the uh, Carthaginian versions of their deities. These were known as Siculo-Punic coins. Then we have the Celts. The Celts primarily adopted coins as a result of their mercenary activities. The Celts were used as mercenaries by the Greeks from the west to the east. They also were early on in this period, in the 5th century. They occupied the Danubian regions as well as regions to the west, and a major invasion of the Greek mainland was conducted by what became known as the Galatians. The Celts actually plundered the great religious sanctuaries of Delos and other places, Olympia, and basically moved on into central Anatolia, where they decided to settle after leaving a portion of their wealth to go back to the west. So the Galatians became an important part of central Anatolia for the next few centuries as a Celtic island within a sea of Middle Eastern peoples. What's interesting about their coinage was they took the basic idea of, say, the coinage of Philip the Great, the Macedonian, not Philip the Great, Philip II, and then slowly adapted it over a period of decades to more Celtic ideas of art. So you get a coin such as the one at the left, slowly metamorphosizing to the point where it's barely recognizable by the last coin at the lower right. And yet they're quite beautiful, and you can still see a relationship to the original. A very interesting series with some beautiful coinage. And the final series we'll talk about is just the Parthians. The Parthians, Parthian coinage counts as Greek coinage, but they were actually horse nomads who took over a part of the Seleucid Empire. In particular, they occupied what had been the province of Parthia and were given the name of Parthians over the next couple of generations. By 247 BC, Arsaces I, the founding dynast of the Arsacid or Parthian Empire, took over Parthia, and his successors, particularly Mithridates I and Mithridates II, expanded the empire to control all of the region of what is today Persia and Iraq, Iran and Iraq, and became the dominant power within that region. In fact, they became the only major Hellenistic kingdom to stand up to the Romans at their height. They were able to hand Rome some major defeats, famous defeats, such as the defeat of Crassus at Carrhae in 52 BC. They produced their own interesting series of coinage. And with that, we'll end the talk. I hope this has been a useful introduction to the Greek coinage series, and I welcome any questions you might have. I will stop the share in just a
Thank
second.
you, Doug. Right now we have one question. And you might have touched on it, but why the turtles? What did they symbolize something?
Yes, they symbolized the maritime basis for Aegean wealth. So the sea turtles seem to be, Aegina is a very small town. There's really not much, not town. It's a small city, but it's on a small island. So there was not much actual wealth to be found there, and therefore the sea turtle was an ideal way of indicating where their power and their wealth came from.
Great. We don't have any other questions. I'll give it just a second. I'm gonna give our wrap up and see if any more questions pop in. I just want to thank everybody for joining us, and thank you, Doug, for a great presentation. Our NumismaTalks are being recorded and are available to our members after editing on our new e-learning academy, which just kicked off. So please be sure to check for future programs on our website at money.org under the education tab. So thank you, everybody. And Doug, somebody wants to know where they go for purchasing these coins.
I mean, you can go to various coin shows, but online would be the easiest way if you don't have any coin shows or local coin dealers that have shops that offer the ancient coins. In particular, there are places such as cngcoins.com. There's Numisma and other sites, even on eBay. CNG Coins is a great site because one of the things you can do when you get onto their site is you can see a lot of information. They tend to have descriptions of their coins, and you can look at their old auctions to find some really cool pieces. But that's, online, there's some great sites that can be used to buy the coins if you don't have anything nearby that's face to face.
Great. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining, and thank you, Doug, for a great presentation.
Thank you. Have a great one.
You too.